Welcome to the third in our series of 5 brief videos on writing a good church history paper. We started with choosing a topic, and if you didn't know where to start, I suggested choose a time period and a location. Second thing we talked about is developing a thesis, that it is a claim that needs to be defended, and you should give us a little preview of where you're going with it. It's not a statement of opinion, and it's not merely a report with a whole lot of facts. The third in our series of videos is about doing your research, right? And historical research can move in 2 directions. You can go from the general to the specific, or the specific to the general. For instance, if you don't really know what to write your church history paper on, I advise starting with the time period and the location. It's a very general, broad area. And as you read in that area, you can start to narrow it down to a specific thesis. Some students come to me right off the bat, hey, Dr. Cuthbert, I want to do X. And it's something very specific. And I encourage them, well, that's fine, but you have to incorporate other information there. You have to move from the specific to the general. Either one is appropriate. I think at your level, maybe moving from the general to the specific is probably the best way to do it. And that's the research process I'm going to explain here. Because when you move from the general to the specific, first you have to start with general texts. And there are a number of general texts that it's fine to start with, but they're not what I would call citable sources. Your Gonzalez text is a general text. And yeah, it's fine to cite Gonzalez for some things. But you shouldn't be able to prove your argument using only Gonzalez, right? Other general texts that are probably not appropriate to cite, Wikipedia, which it's a lot better than it used to be, but it's not a citable source. Encyclopedias like the World Book or Encyclopedia Britannica. It's fine if you want to start poking around there to give yourself a direction, but that should not give you the meat of your argument in your paper. Instead, the most general text that's appropriate for a graduate student to poke around in is discipline-specific encyclopedias, handbooks, dictionaries, things like that. And again, I'm going to use Jonathan Edwards as an example, simply because I know that literature the best. So in the world of Jonathan Edwards, there are sources like the Oxford Handbook of Jonathan Edwards, or the Princeton Companion to Jonathan Edwards. And it's a series of articles written by subject experts on a relatively narrow topic, but not a super specific topic. If you're starting your research, whether or not it's in the early church, the medieval period, Reformation period, early modern period, there are handbooks, encyclopedias, dictionaries within that discipline-specific area, written by subject area experts, that it is very helpful to start with. Although, again, I would expect you to go a little bit deeper than that. After starting with those discipline-specific handbooks and such, I would encourage you to look at various monographs. Monographs are exactly what the Latin words suggest. Mono meaning one, graph meaning writing, or writing on one subject. Normal people call them books, although books covers a lot more. The discipline-specific encyclopedia is a book. This is a specific type of book on one subject. And a lot of times these subjects will be much more specific, but still provide a broad enough treatment you can get 150 to 300 pages out of it. In the world of Jonathan Edwards, some of the more notable monographs are Jonathan Edwards' Philosophy of History, or Deification in the Thought of Jonathan Edwards. It's not just about Jonathan Edwards' life, it's about a specific area of his life. But it does kind of cover his entire life there, right? The third type of source, once you read the discipline-specific handbooks, encyclopedias, once you look at some of the monographs, then you can look at journal articles. And journal articles are about 12 to 30 pages about a very narrow topic within your field. I wrote a journal article on Jonathan Edwards' uncle, Colonel Stoddard, and his involvement in King George's War as an extension of Edwards' philosophy of history or theology of history. Very narrow, very specific. So when we talk about the various sources from general to specific, we're talking about discipline-specific reference material, handbooks, encyclopedias. We're talking about monographs, talking about journal articles. Let me give you a little heads up on how to use these. I would start with the discipline-specific reference material, and I would just thumb through the areas that I'm interested in for the paper. Then when I start to get a little bit more focused than just a general topic, I will get into the library catalog and I will find maybe a dozen or more monographs that might speak directly to the subject that I'm researching. And then I will get them off the shelves and I'll put them in a stack in front of me. I'll read the table of contents. I'll read the introduction. I might read the first couple lines of each chapter. I'll look at the footnotes. And I'll try to decide, okay, is this a book that is specific to my paper? Now, at this point, you should have a pretty good idea of what your thesis is, so you know which monographs apply and which monographs don't. And I'll literally make two piles. One that might be helpful to what I'm writing, I'll put on my right, and ones that won't, I'll put on my left, Jesus and the sheep and the goats, right? And I might do that process several times until I have enough monographs to support what it is I'm writing. For your 10 to 13-ish page paper, I would imagine 1 to 3 monographs would be enough. But with so few monographs, you have to make sure they're right on point. Right? They can't be just generally in your topic. They should be speaking directly to your thesis. I will read through those. I will take notes on those, noting what does help my argument, what does not help my argument. And then from there, I'll go and look at journal articles. And there are 2 places I go to look at journal articles. I start with JSTOR, JSTOR.org, I believe. And you can create a free online account that gives you something like 50 downloads for free a month. And I will put the terms of my thesis into the search bar, right? I did my dissertation on Jonathan Edwards and warfare, so I will start Jonathan Edwards and warfare. And I'll see what pops up. And I'll kind of vet these journal articles till I get it down to the ones that directly apply to my topic. In your case, I like to see 1 or 2 journal articles. You don't need to go overboard with them because they are very specific. And that's how I will vet my various sources, develop the material which I research. I will offer one warning, though. And if this warning applies to you, it is a sign you're doing your paper correctly. Okay. There is a saying that dissertations are not completed, they're abandoned. In other words, you come to a point where you've done more than enough research and you just have to write the dissertation and you have to limit how much extra research you do. And this is a tremendous temptation. Because let me give you a hint that might help you with your paper. It might also plague you as well. Because when you read through a monograph, a good monograph, it'll have footnotes, possibly endnotes. I prefer the ones with footnotes, right? And I'll read a statement. I'll be like, wow, that's amazing. That's really helpful. Where did he or she get this from? And I'll look at the bottom of the page and say, wow, there's a whole journal article on this topic I didn't know about. Or there's a whole book on this topic, monograph on this topic I didn't know about. So I'll go and I'll find it. And I'll read through that next book. And I'll come to another statement. Wow, that's really helpful. Where did he or she get this? Sure enough, I'll look at the footnote and it'll point me to something else. Now, keep in mind, for every monograph you read, you should have more than one piece of information that's helpful in there. Let me be conservative and say there's a dozen helpful statements in there. which should give you a dozen or so footnotes of additional books or journal articles. Each one of those can give you a dozen. You see where this is going? It is an endless process. And this is actually something I think is cool about academia. You're joining a conversation. You are spinning a web that's been spun for a number of generations. And this web always keeps going. And it can take you to places you never knew that you were even interested, never even knew existed. But you have to keep the scope of your paper in mind. For a 10 to 13 page research paper, you don't have a whole lot of freedom to explore this web. A dissertation, you have a little bit more time to do it, but even with a dissertation, you won't be able to explore the entire web. And as I'm finding out, even with a career in research and academia, you're not going to be able to explore the entire web. So don't carry that around as a burden. That's actually a lesson I learned from Dr. Isaac at Gordon Conwell. He would say that you'll never be able to read everything in your field. And that was a tremendous relief to me once I figured out I, in fact, could not read everything in my field. So in your 10-page journal article, your 10-page research paper, start general, move to specific. Try and vet sources that are on point, and try not to get sucked down too many rabbit trails. There is a fourth type of source that you need to use in order to write a good church history paper. You got your general sources, discipline-specific handbooks, encyclopedias, you have monographs, you have journal articles. Those are all secondary sources. I also expect that you will draw on primary sources. Primary sources are writings developed by the person or the time period in which you're writing. So in talking about Jonathan Edwards, a primary source would be the books, the sermons, the letters, the treatises that Jonathan Edwards himself wrote. It might also include newspaper articles around the time of Jonathan Edwards. It might include writings of other people that connected with Edwards at some point in time. But the key part is it comes from the time period in which you're writing. So while it is good on the secondary source side to start general handbooks, monographs, journal articles, I also expect that you will include primary sources. Now, for a 10 to 13 page research paper, you need to choose which primary sources you interact with well. Because in most cases, there will be so much primary source material, you won't have time to read it all before the due date, much less have space to discuss it in the length of paper that you're doing. The printed works of Jonathan Edwards run to 26 volumes, and that's only about 60% of what exists from Jonathan Edwards. Augustine runs to, I think, something like 1 million pages. So you're not going to be able to read it all. Similarly, there are some other sources that we don't have much at all, and there might not be enough there to write on. So you're going to have to focus your topic, if you're incorporating primary sources, to a limited number or a limited amount of primary source material. For instance, if you were doing a paper on Augustine, you might do well to identify Augustine's thought within a specific treatise, De Doctrina or the Confessions. Something as large as the City of God, you might even want to narrow it down to just a part of the City of God. Similarly with Jonathan Edwards, you might want to narrow your topic to a manageable treatise of his, like An Humble Attempt. He has treatises that are very long and involved: Freedom of the Will, Original Sin, History of the Work of Redemption. Those might be too long to do a 10 to 13 page paper, even on that source. So in the same way that you have to use your topic in order to focus the relevant source material on the secondary source side, you also have to use your topic to limit the material in your primary source side. And I do expect you to have primary sources. Thank you.